Hello, welcome to another edition of Labor's Worldview TV. I'm your host, David Johnson. Today I have a special guest, Dr. David Gill, who's running for U.S. Congress in the 13th Congressional District. We're going to be talking to him in just a second. Welcome, Dr. Gill, to the Labor's Worldview TV. I really appreciate you coming out and wanting to share some of your views and reasons why you're running for the 13th Congressional District.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here, David. Thanks for having me on this show. As you know, my name's Dr. David Gill, and I'm one of the 5 Democrats running for Congress here in Illinois 13. I live over in Bloomington with my wife, Elaine. We've got 3 sons and 3 daughters and a pair of cats and 2 rescue dogs and a couple of turtles even. And I didn't have the easiest of upbringings. My dad died when he was just 37 years old, and so I really had next to nothing. And I've spent the last 25 years working in emergency departments throughout central Illinois, taking care of a lot of patients, many of whom have next to nothing also. And in fact, you know, life has been very hard economically for the vast majority of Americans for 2 generations now, 40 years, primarily because of the fact that we keep electing the wrong kind of representatives who do the work on behalf of their wealthy donors. And my progressive message, my message of single-payer health care now, $15 an hour minimum wage now, and tuition-free access to public higher education and trade schools, that message those things would improve the lives of the vast majority of people that live here in Illinois 13. And it's not just a good message, it's also a winning message. You know, my message won by 7 points when I ran for this same seat back in 2012. The voters just had the misfortune of having a liberal independent on the ballot who was saying all the same things as me about single payer and so on and so forth, such that Rodney Davis wound up escaping with a very narrow 0.3% victory, 0.3 of 1 percentage point. And since that time, I've watched. I've gone back into the emergency department. I've spent time working as the assistant director of the Illinois Department of Public Health, helping to roll out the ACA here in Illinois. And I've watched as subsequent, more conservative Democrats have been losing this seat by 18 to 20 points. And I can't watch anymore. The importance of us having a new Democratic majority in the U.S. House coming out of these midterms is too important. And I'm up against primary opponents who sound very similar to those Democrats that have lost by 50 to 60 times what I lost by. And so I really feel compelled to run once more because my message wins. My message defeats Rodney Davis handily. And so I'm out there beating the bushes in all 14 counties of the district, encouraging people to get behind me on March 20th so that we have the best opportunity to end Mr. Davis's stay in Washington next November, this coming November.
Okay, and you know, I just saw an interesting news segment last night that you know, there's you'd think that after this last election that the Democratic National Committee would have you know, learned their lesson, but it seems as if the people like you, there's a lot of people like you all over the country. I mean, you were the pioneer, if you will, probably, but there's like these journalists documented 50 other people that are running. I mean, just regular people that are running for U.S. Congress, and they're having no luck with getting any support from the DCCC, the Democratic National Committee. And in fact, the Democratic National Committee's funding the same people that lost last time in 2016. Basically, like you said, that all these candidates that they're funding have the same thing in common, is that they hardly ever state their platform positions.
No.
They won't support single payer or opposition to NAFTA or the other corporate trade treaties, or make a commitment as far as what a increase in the minimum wage would be.
Right.
And it's interesting that your opponents, I saw the debate when here in Champaign, it was right before the holidays.
Right.
And what was really striking, I thought, among other issues, is first of all, none of your opponents on their Facebook pages have platform positions. You're the only candidate that has specific platform positions.
Yeah, I lay out what I stand for, you know, and I've made very clear for 25 years as a member of Physicians for a National Health Program that I'm very passionate about the need for single-payer health care. Some of my opponents in the primary offer a vague, bland message of, well, we might get there someday, and there's not time to wait. We've been waiting for decade after decade. FDR was talking about single payer as part of his second Bill of Rights. Richard Nixon was talking about single payer back in 1970 or so, and we've waited long enough. Every day that we wait is another day that an American dies every 15 minutes just because they don't have the right insurance. And so for us to leave this in the hands of the for-profit private health insurance industry does a grave disservice to the American people. And so, and you're right, you know, it's frustrating, frankly. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm an FDR Democrat, as it were. And to see that my party has now also been captured by the same corporate interests that have long owned the Republican Party, it's frustrating, it's disappointing. You know, having watched, having come so close in 2012, having won but for that liberal independent, and then to see my party spurn me and my message and continue on this path of losing by 50 to 60 times what I lost by, it makes you question our party. There's no question there's a schism within the Democratic Party. We saw it on full display in the presidential primaries of 2016, Bernie versus Hillary, and it's, you know, hopefully I'm hoping not only to take this seat, but to be a leader in Congress, speaking with my physician's voice in moving us towards single payer, and hopefully in restoring our Democratic Party to what it once was, a true populist institution that speaks to the interests of ordinary men and women across this country.
Yeah, in fact, the previous election, the person who ran hardly spent any money at all compared to the person who ran before them, who spent a lot of money and had full backing from the Democratic National Committee, and yet he won by the same percentage. I'm sorry, he lost by the same percentage points.
Yeah, they both lost by 18 to 20 points. I think we now know what the basement is with regards to running with a D after your name, and I think I demonstrated in 2012 what can be achieved if you have the right message delivered by the right messenger.
And you've worked the district, I mean, back in 2012.
Oh, yeah.
With a new district that was redrawn from the old one. And I think you ran in the old one, which was a horribly gerrymandered district.
You know, that was hopeless. And,
Yeah.
and so I know some people get irritated with the fact that I ran previously, but those runs against Tim Johnson in the old Illinois 15, those weren't run with the intention of winning. It would have been nice, but it would have taken a miracle running in a district that is 3-1 Republican to pull off that type of upset. That's not going to happen. But I think that I did provide a voice to those who were looking for a voice. I think that we were able to move Mr. Johnson in certain areas in terms of war and peace and in terms of the environment. And you know, I think that they were worth running, but they weren't meant to achieve electoral victory. And then there are segments of the voting population that hold those against me. When, you know, the fact of the matter is I've been on the ballot one time in a district where I had a chance, and unfortunately it wasn't a two-person race against Mr. Davis that year.
Yeah, but I think the point is that this is a winnable district, this new...
It is, if you have the right message. You know, this is a great district. This is a district filled with kind and thoughtful, bright people that are just looking for somebody to stand up and say the types of things that I talk about. And it doesn't respond well to those that offer a bland message of, well, let's make sure everybody has better private insurance, and you know, maybe we can raise the minimum wage some nominal amount, that type, or maybe we can make sure kids have a smaller debt load when they leave college, as opposed to talking about true tuition-free access to higher education.
Yeah, you've talked, of course, about single payer, which is, of course, Medicare for all.
Right.
And you've been an emergency room physician. I'm sure you've seen a lot of really sad, horrible things. Yes.
Yeah, it's terrible. I've been speaking recently about a gentleman I saw 6 weeks ago down in Randolph County, which is actually south of the district, but I go down there once or twice a month to take a shift. And it was a 60-year-old guy, hardworking guy. He has insurance, but like so many Americans, it's not good insurance. And like 42% of Americans, he lives paycheck to paycheck, even though he works hard. And the copay for him to walk into an emergency department is $500. And he woke up one morning with belly pain. He contacted his primary care doctor and described it, and she told him, you better go to the emergency room. But because of those financial concerns that you only have here in America, he stayed home, and he waited too long. He finally, after 16 or 18 hours, he came into my emergency department and met me. By that time, his appendix had perforated, and he was life-threateningly ill with sepsis, bacteria in his bloodstream, because of the perforation of the appendix. And it's just ridiculous. It's really what drives me to run, to not go away and to stand up and say, we need to do this. We need to make this change now. It's not something that we can put off down the road. Because you know something else, David? Power, with apologies to Frederick Douglass, power doesn't
concede anything without a
concede
demand.
anything without a demand.
Yes.
Exactly. And when you don't demand single payer today, then you're not going to get single payer. You know, we saw that in the initial stages of the debate over the ACA when they locked out the single payer advocates from the discussion. The die was cast, and the insurance companies, the for-profit private health insurance industry, continued to have their way. There were more champagne bottles uncorked the night that the ACA passed than anywhere else in America because those guys had dodged a bullet. So Wendell Potter, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's been a whistleblower of sorts. He was very high up vice president with one of the big 5 health insurance companies, and he tells that story about the celebrating that went on with the passage of the ACA amongst the private health insurance industry executives.
Yes, boy, we could talk all. I mean, that's an issue I'm very passionate about too. But of course, there's other issues affecting
Sure.
you know, people out there. And you know, one thing, you know, a lot of young people don't feel like they, you know, the health and insurance thing is that important to them because they're young. But young people do get in auto accidents, they have sporting accidents.
I see it every day.
But one thing that definitely affects young people is the whole thing with student debt, the high cost of not just public universities, but like trade schools as well, or community colleges.
Yeah.
And what would you like to do? What do you think should be done about that?
Again, I think that we need tuition-free access to all public institutions of higher learning, whether they be trade schools, community colleges, or universities. And it's something that we can easily achieve. It's just a question of having our priorities straight. If you had a small financial transactions tax, that, as Bernie Sanders used to talk about, that would easily cover the cost of sending.
That'd be like a half a percentage,
or a quarter percent,
or a quarter percentage on every trade on the
exactly on every
commodities.
trade on Wall Street. Yeah, and you know, I talk a lot about the resetting of our priorities. You know, yourself and myself, and probably a lot of people watching this today, were out there in January and February of 2003 saying, "Don't invade Iraq." You know, that's foolishness. We didn't get our way, did we? But had we gotten our way, the money that we have put into the invasion of Iraq and the consequences of that invasion, that would have funded not 5 years of college, not 10 years of college and trade school. It would have funded 50 to 100 years of college, trade school, universities for all the young people that want to have the opportunity to make their lives better through education.
You know, I'm glad you brought that issue up about comparing it to the invasion of Iraq and other wars of imperial conquest, as I like to call them.
Yeah, that's what they are, David.
Yeah, and because I just did an article about 3 months ago called "The Hidden Costs of War." When I started, you know, I knew intuitively that there had to be a lot of them, and when I really dug into it, it blew my mind. I mean, as far as just how we're suffering in this country, you know, because of this bloated military budget, because these foreign invasions and the occupations, our infrastructure's, you know, just badly deteriorating.
Priorities are way out of line.
We still don't have high-speed rail, and you know, what about alternative energy and stuff? I mean, so what do you feel the same way, or what are your views? Yeah,
exactly. We have 200,000 homes in this congressional district that don't have broadband internet, which, you know, you could invest yourself as a nation in making sure that everybody had broadband internet, which really, you know, for all intents and purposes, that ought to be a utility in the same way that electricity is a utility. But we don't, yet because we throw our money away on endless war, a military budget that is the sum of the military budget of the next 8 to 27 countries, depending on how you're counting and who's doing the counting. And you know, why is that, David? Ultimately, it boils down to these people in Washington, D.C., our representatives, or misrepresentatives, as I call them. They are bought and sold by the corporate interests of this country, by the arms manufacturers, the defense contractors, in addition to the pharmaceutical and insurance industry and the fossil fuel industry. We do the wrong thing in all these different areas because these guys are bought and sold by corporate America. And Rodney Davis and people like Rodney Davis, they don't care about the lives of the ordinary people that live in Staunton, Illinois, and Bloomington and Clinton and up and down this district. You know, their concern is with their corporate ownership. And we saw that reflected in the tax reform bill passed last month, which was nothing but a handout, a gift to corporate America. They've whined for years about their 35% corporate tax rate, but in fact it's not 35%. Because the Congress people that they own have written in thousands of loopholes so that their real actual tax rate has been 18 to 19%, and for almost half of them, more than 40% of the large corporations in this country, the tax rate has been a big fat zero. And because of the loopholes that are there. And so they've been setting record profits over the last several years, the large corporations in America. They didn't need what we just gave them. And in fact, I don't have to tell you, David, not only did they not need it, not only is it ultimately going to be a burden placed upon those who make $75,000 a year or less, which is a sizable majority of the people in Illinois 13, but it also opens the door to Paul Ryan's dream of saying, well, now with deficits where they're at, we're going to have to start to strip further at our social safety net, our Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And, it's been a grand design for a long time to make life hard for the 99%.
So needless to say, I take it you support, strengthening and possibly expanding Social Security?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. Social Security, they call it an entitlement. No, it's something that people earned. Look at your paycheck. Look at your pay stub. You put into it every week or every 2 weeks, however often you get paid. That's money that you put aside to take care of your retirement. Same thing with Medicare. So, it's a misnomer to call it an entitlement. It's not some gift that people haven't earned over a lengthy period of time. It's yours, and it ought not to be taken away by people like Paul Ryan and Rodney Davis.
Okay, so since this district is a lot of it's agricultural district, and of course you hear a lot of misinformation about farm policy, especially in regards to NAFTA, other corporate trade treaties. I mean, I know when NAFTA first came out, they were selling it to the farm community as going to be the biggest boom ever. And I don't know, what's your opinion on this? I mean, how does this interrelate with the agricultural community, excluding big corporate entities?
Well, and that's who it's been good for.
Okay.
NAFTA has been good for the large corporate farms, but for the small family farms, which unfortunately we don't have near as many of as we once did, it hasn't been anything special, but it has resulted in the delivery of large amounts of subsidized grain down south, into Mexico and points south of Mexico. And in fact, it ties in with immigration. I've heard it said that of the 11 million undocumented immigrants, upwards of 8 million of those are people who found that they could no longer make ends meet. People don't want to move away from their homes, but if you're starving because you can't keep up with the low price provided by an unfortunate trade bill like NAFTA, and you've been a subsistence farmer in Mexico for generations and no longer can make ends meet, you will, try to seek higher water, so to speak, and greener pastures. And so it really has had ramifications that stretch far and wide. Not only has it hurt Mexicans who have found that they have to reach out somewhere else to try to keep a roof over their heads, but it's taken a tremendous toll on Americans that work in manufacturing jobs, which have sadly dissipated to the point where they're almost non-existent here in America anymore. So, and again, we saw that coming, didn't we, David? I mean, when you don't write in worker protections appropriately for the other countries, then these corporations, they're going to go to where they can pay their workers as little as possible, and the American worker won't stand for it, and so they just have taken the jobs away from America and sent them overseas to places where they can get away with it.
Okay. And so sort of in that vein, what is your opinion on the minimum wage? Should it be raised, and by how much in your opinion?
I'm a passionate advocate of a $15 an hour minimum wage today, and then after that going up based on index to inflation. My primary opponents don't seem to join me in the fight for 15. I think it's a very important fight. I think it's especially important to women. Women have gotten shortchanged for decade after decade. I'm a big supporter of seeing us pass the ERA, but you look at this minimum wage for servers, which is $2.13 an hour. I mean, my grandmother served tables for 60 years. She's got the varicose veins to show it. And I've got a daughter who goes to college, and she is a server at an Olive Garden. And to pay somebody $2.13 an hour is just a joke. It's a sham. It goes against everything that we believe in as far as what the American dream should consist of. And it also forces, women are the majority of servers, and it forces them to put up with all manners of disturbing behavior on the part of their superiors and their customers because they have to sort of adopt this meek posture in order to then make up in tips what they're not making because they're being paid a fraction of what they should be paid. So we need a $15 an hour minimum wage now. And someone asked me last night, I was down at an event in Jersey County, Elsa, Illinois, and they said, what's the one thing that you stand for that would improve life the most for people in this district? And I really think, in addition to single payer, the $15 an hour minimum wage would make a huge difference for so many people that live and work hard here in this district.
I mean, of course, you've heard the term soccer moms, and I imagine you get into these smaller communities and you actually encounter a lot of waitress moms. I
Sure.
mean, you know,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, since you just said that a lot of small family farms have gone under,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these small communities, most of the people commute for jobs,
And
or
it's a lot of service jobs.
And a lot of
it-
service
it's
jobs.
Service
Mhm.
jobs that don't pay like manufacturing jobs paid once upon a time in this country. And people work hard. You know, I think there's this misunderstanding with regards to people that need help. It's not that they're lazy. They're working hard. There's a lot of people that are working 40 hours a week, 50, 60 more hours a week. But when you're paying them $7.25 or $8.25 or $9 an hour in today, with the way the things cost, it's very difficult for them to make ends meet and to pay them what they're worth. The American worker has never been more productive than he or she is today. And unfortunately, it's not a trickle-down economy. It's the work put forth by the American worker is sucked up by the 1% who's never been fatter than they are today.
Well, that pretty much does it for my questions for you. Was there something we didn't cover that you'd like the viewers to hear?
Well, I would just say that, you know, when I ran back in 2012, there was a lot of money spent against me by the Republican National Committee and Mr. Davis and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They put $3 or $4 or $5 million into vetting me, trying to learn everything about my past and running commercials about me, some of which were cartoonish, some of which were outright lies. But I survived all of that, and for all intents and purposes, my message won. And I'm up against people that, if one is to consider supporting them in the primary, one ought to be fully cognizant of all elements of their biography, because there will be $3 million of dark, shadowy commercials about anything and everything that these people have been engaged in. And separate and apart from that, I think, is the sense that, as I indicated, my message wins. For whatever reason, there's people up and down this district that are swing voters, that are independents or thoughtful Republicans who disagree with one or more of my progressive positions, and yet, whether it's because I've been an emergency room doctor in at least 5 counties throughout this district, they've come to recognize that I do the things that I do simply because I care deeply about their well-being. And I'm able to win those votes. And to just go out there with a D after your name and to present a bland, moderate/conservative message is not going to get the job done. So if we want to get rid of Rodney Davis, I think there's one sure way to have that happen in November, and that's to nominate me on March 20th.
Okay, David, Dr. Gill, is there some things that we haven't touched on today? Maybe, what's your opinion on legalization of marijuana?
Oh, I've been a long-time advocate of legalizing marijuana. You know, working in the emergency department, I see the consequences of legal alcohol every shift, several times each shift, the damage that is wrought on people's lives through the violence associated with alcohol, through the accidents associated with alcohol, and it has boggled my mind for years and years and years why that's legal, but marijuana, which doesn't seem to result in any of the negative consequences that we see from alcohol, why is marijuana illegal? So I've long been an advocate of legalizing marijuana. I think it's senseless and based upon some old prudish horror films of the 1930s that had no basis in fact. I think it's ridiculous that we don't legalize marijuana for recreational use. And, you know, and not only does it make common sense from a scientist's point of view, but it also could serve as a boon to the economy. When you regulate it and put a small tax on it, you do well for revenue sources with respect to local governments.
Not to mention the savings on putting people in prison.
Oh, yeah.
I think, what, 50% of the state prison population is there for nonviolent drug offenses?
Exactly, exactly. And, you know, we haven't talked at all about the need to reform our privatized prison system, which is just a sad state of affairs. And I think that we need to stop privatizing that. We need to stop putting a profit motive into locking people up, and instead put that money into educating people.
Okay. And so, what about issues like a woman's right to choose abortion?
Well, David, I'm a 20-year member of a group called Physicians for Reproductive Choice. I've done volunteer work for Planned Parenthood of East Central Illinois, so I don't think there's a candidate running in this race who is more pro-choice than myself. I used to be in family practice for many years before I shifted over to emergency medicine 20 years ago, and I delivered hundreds of babies. I was there for hundreds of pregnancies, you know, really getting to know women and their families. I've been there in the emergency department for hundreds of miscarriages, and having been involved to that extent, obviously I'm not a woman, but I'm the next best thing to a woman. I'm someone who's been there throughout all stages of the reproductive health setup on 1,000 occasions, and it's very clear to me that it's an intimate, personal thing that's going on with a woman, and it's not the right of Uncle Sam or Rodney Davis to insert himself into decisions related to reproductive health care.
Okay. And as far as LGBT or otherwise gay rights, as it's known,
Sure.
what's your opinion on that?
Well, I was a longtime advocate of marriage equality. I can remember back in that old Illinois 15 running against Mr. Johnson and standing up for marriage equality and having people tell me, now this was back in the dark ages when I would have people working on my campaign saying, "Doc, you can't say that out loud," because it was very unpopular. But, you know, it's I speak my mind, and so I've been thrilled with the advances, the rapid advances in marriage equality. But I think that we need to continue to protect our friends in the LGBTQ community. I'm a 24-year proud card-carrying member of the American Civil Liberties Union, and my friends, my gay friends, remain under attack with a president of the White House who's appointing justices to the federal courts and to the Supreme Court who are not sympathetic to their cause. And so I think that we need people in Washington, D.C. who are not sticking their finger in the wind, but who have a part of their DNA, part of their emotional makeup is such that they stand up for against discrimination of any sort, and that's me.
Okay. And one thing we mentioned post-high school education earlier. What are your views on K through 12 education and preschool for that matter as well? Do you think it's adequately funded or
No, not even close. And it's amazing. Head Start is it's the best investment we could. You can't think of a better use for public monies than to invest in Head Start. For every dollar that you put into Head Start, you get $7 back in terms of savings with regards to repairs to that social safety net that are required for those who grow up not having experienced something such as Head Start. And I think that we need to fully invest ourselves in public education. I don't think any of our public money should be going into these charter schools. Again, I'm a longtime member of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and to see this sort of veiled attempt to indoctrinate young people into certain religions with my taxpayer dollars, I'm affronted by that. And we see far too much of that from elected officials today. And so I think that our money should go into public education and in a much more sizable fashion than what we have seen. There's really a position of no more responsibility than grade school teachers. And the disrespect that we show them by not rewarding them in a way that reflects just how much responsibility they hold taking care of our children and teaching our children for 8 hours a day is shameful, and it should be a position that's held in high esteem and rewarded appropriately with appropriate pay.
Okay. I saved the big one for last, climate change. Do you believe in climate change?
You know what? That is the big one. There is no issue more important, David. I have a passion for healthcare, having lived and breathed healthcare for almost 3 decades now, but even that has to rank behind climate change because climate change is very real. I'm a man of science. It's very clear. It's been very clear for 3 decades now, and our failure to answer the call with respect to climate change, man-caused climate change, is a gross disservice to those coming behind us because we are on a dangerous curve. In fact, we're approaching the point of irreversibility when it comes to climate change. And for us not to invest ourselves fully and aggressively in renewables and in taking action against the fossil fuels that have brought climate change, that have brought our civilization to its knees, really, if you look at the science, is gravely irresponsible. And all these other issues, while they're incredibly important, they're going to be moot when we don't have human civilization, when there are no more humans walking the earth in 150 or 250 years. Well, there won't be fights about health care or immigration or anything else. So we must invest ourselves in renewables fully and completely.
Okay, Dr. Gill, thank you so much for coming on Labor's Worldview TV, and the best of luck to you.
Thank you, David. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.